Excellent, guys. So thank you all for being here with me today. I know this meeting was a little rushed. I sent it out not all that long ago. So thank you to everybody who's on here today to take a couple minutes to talk with me. My name is Alex Van Pelt. I'm sure almost everybody on this call knows me. I'm the state floodplain coordinator. We are going to talk today about the floodplain general permit. This is a brand new permit Division of Water has started using as of the 1st of this month. We're going to talk about what the permit is, what does it cover, what does it not cover, and then how does it work, either for the state level and how does it affect your all's local programs. So we're going to spend about the next 45 minutes or so on that. As we go through this, guys, GoToMeeting has changed their software a little bit. So the premise of what I'm about to talk about, housekeeping-wise, is the same. The buttons look a little bit differently, but you should have a control bar either on the right side or if you're doing it in your browser at the top or bottom of your screen. I'm going to have everybody muted just so we don't have any background noise distracting you from what I'm talking about. So if you have questions or if you have comments or if you want me to address something a little more thoroughly, use that chat box. I'm going to be monitoring as I go through. There will be a final Q&A at the end. So if you have questions and I don't answer it during the presentation, either it's going to be answered later on in the presentation or I'm going to get it at the end. So use that chat box, ask questions as we go through. Quick outline, we're going to talk about the old permitting process. A lot of you guys are familiar with that. And then we're going to talk about the new general permit. We're going to give you a quick overview. And then we're actually going to dive into the permit itself. So the email I sent out to everybody should have had the floodplain general permit attached to it. So if you want to open that up and follow along as we go through, I tried to organize this in the same manner that the general permit's laid out. So we're going to talk about the permit coverage. We're going to talk about exclusions and eligibility. We're going to talk about permit requirements and other conditions, and then we're going to talk about finding and using the general permit. So floodplain permitting. So KRS 151-250, that is the Kentucky revised statute that gives the Energy and Environment Cabinet and the Division of Water, as part of that cabinet, the authority to require floodplain permits anytime you're working along or across a stream. So the statute, really all it's telling us is that we shall issue a permit. It never really said how that permit had to be issued. So for the longest time, no matter what you were doing in the floodplain in Kentucky, you went through the same process, regardless of if you are a half-mile long, load-out facility on the Ohio River loading into barges, or if you are planting a tree in your backyard. Doesn't matter. We treated everything the same for the longest time. What we were kind of finding is as we were requiring these stream construction applications and the public notice, we were finding that for some of the projects, you were spending a lot more time and effort getting it permitted than the project actually took itself. Or another factor we also saw, frequently was the cost to run the newspaper notice cost more than the project would itself. So we were really doubling the cost of what people were wanting to do. We also found that, we have 8 people in the floodplain management section at Division of Water, 5 of which are engineers. We had a lot of very intelligent people spending a lot of time on things that really didn't affect the base flood or the base flood elevation. So what we decided to do as we were, looking through our regs and trying to decide how can we make this better, we came up with the idea of issuing just a general permit. And so what this is intended to do is, we spent all of 2019 and the first couple months of 2020 putting this permit together, trying to decide what do we want it to cover, what do we not want it to cover, what mechanisms do we need to have in place to enforce it and make sure people are complying with all of the federal and state requirements. That was our big key. We wanted to issue this, but also still meet all of our federal and state statutory requirements. The general permit was public noticed back in, I believe it was late April, early May 2020. It ran for a month. We received comments from several different sections, biggest being the Home Builders Association of Kentucky. We reviewed all the comments, we addressed everything, and we actually sent letters back to everybody who commented. And then as of July 1st of this year, the general permit went into effect. When that happened, I actually emailed copies out to all of the local coordinators that are on the call. I sent a copy, it would have been about July 9th or 10th, I believe, as well as we updated the Division of Water's website to where you can find the general permit online. We'll talk about that later in the presentation. So the general permit, essentially what it was, is it's intended to go ahead and just give out essentially blanket coverage for certain activities that have no appreciable impact on the base flood. So there are some things you can do where, no matter how big or small the stream is, you're not going to affect the base flood when it happens. So that's what we regulate, the 1% chance flood. So when you hear me say base flood, that's what I'm talking about, is the 1%, or what they used to call the 100-year flood. The general permit, it pre-approves those activities, and it has already done the public notice, so it meets that statutory requirement. And it's available to anybody in the Commonwealth. So whether you are a private citizen, a community, or anyone else, the general permit, if you can follow everything in it, applies. We modeled this permit after what the Army Corps of Engineers does with their 404 permits for the Clean Water Act, and what our water quality section does with the 401 certifications. So the printout that you get off of our website is your permit. You don't have to apply, you don't have to run a public notice. That printout, once you print it on paper, is your permit. In the general permit, it has, the general permit has permit coverage, eligibility, exclusions, and conditions that whichever permittee is using it has to comply with. And that's what we're going to spend the majority of this presentation talking about, is what are those different sections of the permit? What are they talking about? What are they trying to convey? So again, guys, if you have questions, I am monitoring the chat box. Feel free to ask questions as we go through. So if you have the permits in front of you, great. We're going to just, like I said, follow along section by section. If not, you can just read everything that's on the screen. So section 1, permit coverage, really what this is talking about is what all is this permit trying to do. So it's talking about this permit was issued in accordance with Kentucky statute and Kentucky regulations, as well as the federal regulations. And we're going to talk about what are some of the things that Kentucky was doing previously that didn't quite jive with the federal regulations that this permit is trying to address later on. The general permit the permit coverage, talks about how the general permit works. So development meeting the requirements of this general permit shall have automatic coverage under this general permit, meaning you don't need to apply, you don't need to run a public notice in the newspaper or anything like that. If you qualify for the general permit, you're automatically covered. It also talks about, how do we enforce this? So work performed by the permittee that does not fully comply to this general permit is subject to enforcement pursuant to those 2 Kentucky statutes, which basically says what we can do as a division or what we can do as a cabinet to enforce those actions. So enforce what they should have been doing. If they don't already know the answer to this question, the permittee needs to contact Division of Water to see if a water quality certification or a stream construction permit is needed. There are 2 contact email addresses in the permit coverage section that gives them the contact. So who do they need to talk to get the answers to that? And then lastly, it says that the permittee is liable for any damage resulting from the activities covered under the general permit. So if you do something and it ends up resulting in damage, essentially the permit says you as the property owner, you as the permittee, accept all liability for any resulting damages. So it's your property, you're ultimately responsible for what happens on it. Okay. So we had a question come in that says, if you don't have to apply for the general permit, then how can it be pre-approved and public noticed? It was pre-approved. So I mentioned that the general permit was public noticed back in May. It ran out to anybody who wanted to comment on it. So that was its public notice. And the permit itself is pre-approving certain activities. So the permit is not approving itself, it's approving activities that you can do under the permit. And we'll talk just a second here, Kathy, about those. So the next two sections, eligibility and exclusions, this is where we're going to spend quite a bit of time on, because I want to give everybody a sense of what specifically is excluded from this permit and what is specifically covered. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this next section, section 2 of the permit. So section 2.1, the exclusions, there are certain things that automatically do not apply to the general permit. So if any of these apply to your project, you cannot use the general permit. You have to go through in the normal permitting process and get an individual. So if it's not explicitly listed in section 2.2 under the eligible activities, general permit doesn't apply. Even if you think your project is not going to have any effect on the base flood or the base flood elevations, if it's not explicitly listed, you can't use the general permit. If there's any change to the BFE, so even if it is explicitly listed, if there's going to be any change in base flood elevations, you cannot use the general permit. If an individual permit for 401 or 404 is required by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers or Division of Water, general permit doesn't apply. Individual permits typically are required anytime you are doing very large scale projects, or when you're working in special use waters, exceptional waters, or outstanding state resource waters. If you're not familiar with those, that's fine. We actually have a map on the Water Maps page called the Water Health Portal that you can go on and type in a lat long or a street address and see if you are near one of those water sources. If you are, general permit doesn't apply. They have to actually go through, again, our normal permitting process. Anytime the project involves any residential, non-residential, or appurtenant structures, appurtenant being like a detached garage, barn, one of those small portable warehouses, something like that, or if there's any fill material. If you bring any fill in, the general permit does not apply. Or anytime you're developing a dam, or I should say structures that impound water. So it doesn't even have to qualify to be a dam. If it's impounding water, general permit's not going to apply for it. And then the last thing that this is saying is, we reserve the right at any time to require an individual floodplain permit. So even if your project is explicitly listed in the next section we're going to talk about here in a second, if we feel there may be impacts to somebody else, Division of Water can say, nope, submit an application, run a public notice, we're going through the normal process. So we can do that at any time. So if you guys are concerned that a project is going to affect a neighbor's or an adjoining property owner or something like that, we can always go back and say, let's do a full permit. Okay. Still don't see any questions in the chat box, so we're just going to keep rolling right along. Section 2.2 of the permit, this is the eligible activities. So these are the activities that are approved under this general permit. So these are the activities that you can go through and actually do with this permit without ever having to apply. So we're going to, like I said, we're going to spend a good bit of time on this. And I'm going to show you guys visual examples of what I'm talking about. So first one is any development that is done by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So the Army Corps of Engineers, they oversee 404 permits through the Clean Water Act. They also oversee Section 10, which is the navigable waters, I believe. So they are responsible for dredging operations along major rivers to allow for ship navigation and things like that. They also maintain and operate locks and dams and things like that. So if they would be doing maintenance, for example, on their lock and dam, this general permit is going to cover the activities that they are doing themselves. Now, if you get a 404 permit from the Corps, that does not fall under that because you're doing it, not the Corps. The next one is open space as outlined in 44 CFR 80.19. So this is a federal reg that says what you can and cannot do in mitigation buyout areas. So if you are, putting in a walking path or a bike trail or, using open space as a way to maintain flood storage or something like that, if it's listed in that CFR, you can do that activity using the general permit. Vegetative or riparian buffers. So if you are planting trees, shrubs, or grasses along a stream bank to allow for a buffer to where any soil erosion or sediment or something like that may be in storm water, if you're putting that riparian buffer in to let that sediment drop out, you can go and do that with the general permit. Stream obstruction removal. So this is one where for a long time, we weren't quite following federal requirements to the letter of the law. So federal requirements, federal regs don't actually allow for any exclusions to them. So you either issue a permit or you're not in the floodplain. But for a long time, what Division of Water did was if you have storm debris that would wash up against a bridge or a culvert or something like that, that would cause the next flood to be worse, we wanted you to get that material out. So what we allowed you to do was to remove that material from the floodplain, either from the stream bank or from a bridge or something like that. So you never actually got into onto the sides of the bank or in the water itself. We wanted you to remove that material and take it outside the floodplain. We let you do that for a long time, but we realized we weren't actually doing what we were supposed to. So this general permit allows you to do stream obstruction removal, which is like pulling sticks and limbs and big gravel deposits, things like that, away from stream crossings, as long as you can follow the watershed-friendly stream maintenance guide. So that's posted to our website. There's some requirements in that, like you can't work during fish spawning season, and you can't put material or you can't put machinery in the water. You have to do it from the bank or from the crossing itself. Things like that. So if you can follow all the guides in that stream maintenance guide, we want you to remove that debris, and so now you are permitted. So you're legally covered underneath this general permit for doing that. So if you have road crews or road departments or something like that, this general permit would apply to them, so they can actually pull that material out and maintain those drainage or those crossings so that they're ready for the next event. So Tim, the question you just asked, this general permit is good for 5 years. So if your local road department has a copy of it, they can do these activities. Again, as long as they follow the requirements in that watershed-friendly stream maintenance guide. So if they can do that, they can use this permit. And then normal property maintenance. So if you're doing maintenance, so is what we're calling it. So if you are trimming brush from around or behind your house, if you are trimming limbs or something like that, pulling up or pulling down vines, whatever. If you're doing property maintenance like cuttings, plantings, or temporary debris piles, if you can do it by hand, it's going to be allowed under this general permit. You don't have to get a local permit a state permit from us. Now, with that being said, if they're doing a debris pile, the pile of sticks like I have shown here, they can't leave that there indefinitely. They're allowed 15 days to either haul it off or to burn it. Whichever they want to do, we're fine with from a floodplain, perspective. But they're only given 15 days to do something with it. Now, people will often use chainsaws or power pole saws or something like that when they're trimming limbs. So you can do that. Those are handheld devices, but you have to be able to also haul it away from hand. So the automatic first question I got from our field office is, well, what about logging operations? And logging operations would not apply to this, because while I can cut a tree down by hand, I can't haul it off without, some type of major equipment. I'd need a tractor with a front end loader. I would need a backhoe or something like that. So if you could throw it in the bed of your pickup truck or throw it on the back of your side by side or something like that, those are fine. But if you can't move it by hand, it's not going to fall under this general permit. All right, moving on in the other activities. And again, guys, I'm following the permit, so as you go through, you can take notes and things like that. The next activity that's approved is a below grade swimming pool that is installed outside of a regulatory floodway. So as long as it's not in the floodway and you're putting in a below grade swimming pool, that's going to be covered under the general permit, because nothing you're going to do with that, if you're just digging a hole, installing a pool, and then filling in back around it, that's not going to affect the base flood elevation. So it's going to just go ahead and be covered under this permit. If you have to do a whole lot of grading operations, or if you have to bring in fill or something like that, that's a different story. Again, we have that right to still say, well, we want to take a full look at this with a regular permit. But if all you're doing is digging a hole and then backfilling around it once the pool's installed, that's fine. Next is placement of utility poles, open frame towers, or monopole towers with below grade foundations. We've actually had engineers spend an hour or more of their time looking at, putting in just a single or just a couple of utility poles. No matter how small that stream is, that tower by itself is going to, so negligibly affect the base flood that it's not even going to be mappable. These are going to go ahead and be approved under this. So utility poles are pretty self-explanatory. I think everybody's familiar with them. Open frame towers, so that would be those large transmission lines or something like that. And then monopole towers would be like cell phone towers, for example. If they have below grade foundations, they are going to be pre-approved under this state general permit. We got a question about the pool that just came in. What about a pool house or equipment shed? So that is not going to be covered, because again, that is utility. So when you're talking about a shed or a building or a house or something like that, those are going to be considered structures that would not fall into the general permit. But the pool itself, everything that's below ground is fine. Did that answer your question, Kathy? Okay. All right. So moving on from the utility poles, below grade utilities and subgrade drainage features. So if you're installing a water line or a sewer line on your property without crossing the stream, or if the utility company is using directional drilling or something like that, where they're drilling under a stream, as long as you're not affecting the stream banks or the stream bed itself, that is an eligible activity under the general permit. So all you're doing is digging a trench, laying a sewer pipe, and then filling the trench back in. That's fine. Those are, again, not going to affect the base flood elevation. So we're not too concerned about that. There's no reason to have an engineer spend too much of their time reviewing that application. There's no reason to have somebody do a public notice about that. Open style guardrail along an existing roadway. So this is one of the ones that when we put it in the general permit, the wording was picked very carefully. Open style, there's open style and closed style when you look at, I guess, transportation guidance manuals. Open style guardrails are the ones that would allow a free flow of water, either under, through, around, or something like that. So you can see from the pictures here, these are what we call open style. So the picture on the top is a cable system. The picture on the bottom is the W-beam guardrail. So these are pretty common nowadays that you will see a lot of on county and state roads. The cable system you see a lot now on interstates that have been redone in the last couple of years. They're there to kind of, absorb some of that impact. These are open style because you can very clearly see water can easily flow under, through, or around them. And the poles in the ground themselves are not going to affect the base flood. An example of one that is not open style, so this is what they call a New Jersey barrier. This is also a guardrail, but as you can see, water can't freely flow through or under one of these. So this is going to act more like a dam or a spill material or something like that that is not covered. Whenever the permit was public noticed, we also sent out a fact sheet with a set of definitions for what we considered open style and what we did not. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me directly. I can share that with you, or I can share the source where I got a lot of these guardrail types, so you can take a look for yourself what can be done and what cannot be done with this general permit. So we had another question come in. Kate asked again about the swimming pools. Even a below ground pool has electricity and a pump, so how does that play? If it's subgrade, again, it's going to be fine. So below grade utilities we're okay with. Pump house, where you have to run electric up and into it, or if you're having an above, you have a above ground pump or something like that, that is going to be separate. So, installing the pool itself, digging a hole, pouring the concrete, dropping the liner, backfilling around it, that's all fine. But the below grade utilities, the utilities may have to be considered separately. Otherwise, you have to just go through the full normal permitting system. Another question came in: if a below grade utility is open cut across the stream, is it covered? The answer is no. So if you're working on the stream bank or in the stream bed itself with, say, a trenching machine, that is going to require either an individual or a water quality certification. So when you're working on the stream bank or the bed itself, full normal permit is required. Good questions, guys. I'm loving them. Keep them coming in. Okay, moving on from the guardrails. Geotechnical investigations, archaeological investigations, or the installation of monitoring wells. So this is kind of on the same level as the below grade utilities. A geotechnical investigation, what they're doing here is they're drilling a hole, looking at either the soil or the rock layers underneath, and then they will typically replace it. Same way with an archaeological investigation. They'll go out, dig a hole looking for archaeological artifacts, and then we'll replace the dirt or the material where they found it. And then the monitoring wells are typically, underground or something like that. So those would fall under this general permit. No more are they going to have to apply for each one of these individually. Another question just came in: what about a temporary flume pipe and stone crossing in a stream? Is that covered? So Brian, I'm not necessarily sure what you're talking about there. So reach out to me directly after this, and we can talk more about specifics, because I'm not 100% sure of what you're asking there. Would a stormwater injection well fall under the general permit? So Nick, that kind of depends. Is this going to be a permanent feature, or is it going to be something where you dig a hole and then fill back in over it or something like that? So this is one of the ones where we knew when we issued this there were going to be a lot of particular instances where we were going to have to make decisions. So Nick, this is one where we just need more details. Brian, your question about a temporary flume pipe and stone crossing in a stream, is that covered? You saying it's for construction equipment crossing? The answer is going to be no. So again, if you have to put equipment in a stream that doesn't follow any of the water quality guides, it's not going to fall under this general permit. For something like that, Brian, you're likely going to need an individual. But again, reach out to us directly when these individual instances come up, so we can consider them and give you a firm answer, and then that way we can treat it that way going forward. All right, good questions, guys. Thanks. So we're going to keep moving on. Repairs or maintenance to an existing shallow and narrow man-made drainage way. Drainage way cannot be mapped as having its own floodplain. So this was another one where the wording was picked very carefully for a good reason. So what we're talking about here are something like what you see in this picture, where this is just a small indention or something like that would be either in your backyard or between buildings or something like that, that is going to drain rainwater away from your building. So it's made to drain the water either to a creek or to a ditch out along the road or something like that. So this is going to be very small, again, made for rainwater, not necessarily even stormwater. So this is more for positive drainage away from your building. And then it cannot be mapped as having its own floodplain. So this is another thing where if you're one of the folks from Western Kentucky, a lot of what you call ditches out there are actually the stream that's just been channelized into a ditch. So we were very careful not to use the word ditch anywhere in this because, you know, it could be misconstrued that, oh, well, this is the ditch, so I can go out there and maintain it. That was not what this was intended for. So to give you an example of this, one, you know, it has to be small and man-made. But then two, you can't have something like this. So this is from Owensboro. You have Big Ditch, and I believe Tamarack Ditch. I'm having trouble recalling now. But while these are called ditches, these are actually the streams that have just been channelized many years ago. So if it has its own floodplain, it cannot, you know, use this general permit. But to give an example, if I have a small swale between, you know, my house and my neighbor's house that drains into the ditch in the backyard, you know, you can maintain it through that, basically just to keep it clear of debris or something like that. But again, this one was, the wording was chosen very carefully to make sure that you didn't have people, you know, doing these huge maintenance projects thinking they're covered under this general permit. Robert Hewitt asked, should equipment buildings within the compound lease area associated with open frame towers or monopole towers be issued permits? The answer, Robert, to that is yes. So the tower itself, as it's installed, if it has below grade foundation, the tower itself is fine. With a cell tower, for example, you'll a lot of times see a maintenance box or something like that is installed separately. Those are going to require, you know, normal state and local permits. But the tower itself, if they want to go up and just install it and leave the tower and do that additional work later, they can do that. So the equipment buildings that you call them, absolutely yes, would require permits. All right. So moving on, the next one is development of a fence that does not impede flow during a base flood event. So fences are another one of those things where, you know, as long as they don't impede water, so as long as they're not just a solid rock wall or something like that, water will very easily flow through a chain link fence or a wood privacy fence, for example. You know, small events will flow through them, larger events will lay these over. So, you know, you're not going to have a whole lot of debris from the fence or anything like that. It's not going to really impede water or change the direction of flow. You know, it's going to more, you know, just like I said, bowl them over. So on something like that, you can install a fence in the floodplain under the general permit as long as you don't cross the stream. Again, as soon as you go into the stream itself, other permits and things like that are going to be required. So, you know, a privacy fence between me and my neighbor, I can put that up, but a fence going across the stream to keep my cattle from moving from one field to another, that's something that's totally separate. So a chain link fence, like I'm showing, is great. Here's one that would not be covered. So this is, again, a privacy fence, but it's a solid concrete wall. Water cannot flow through this. So this would absolutely impede water during that base flood event. Locating an RV that is fully licensed and ready for highway use in the floodplain for the base flood event for less than 180 consecutive days. Believe it or not, we used to issue permits for RVs because if you read our regulations, they're not just covered or they're not just allowed. So you actually had to get a permit for an RV. Well, now you're covered under this. So as long as it's fully licensed and ready for highway use, meaning it has license plate, it has tags, it has insurance, it's on tires, the tires are you know, inflated and ready for road use. And as long as you leave it there less than 180 days. So it has to either be lightweight movable, meaning I can pull it with a small pickup truck, or it has to be self-propelled. So you can get in it and drive it away as is. So something like what's shown in the picture where it's just an RV parked, you know, on the side or back of their house, that's fine. Something like this would be a no-no. So this is no longer a RV. This would be considered a mobile home because of several things. One, it has a deck attached. Two, it has an awning overhead attached. Three, you have that wood wall, I guess, on the front end of it where you couldn't back up and drive away with it. And since this is a permanent RV, it likely has a solid sewer pipe or something like that coming out. So this would be considered a mobile home, not an RV. Again, there are 4 or 5 criteria for it to be considered an RV. Rodney asked, what about a structure that is elevated on posts like those on the beach? So no, as soon as you say structure or building, the answer, Rodney, is going to be no. No buildings, no structures fall under this general permit. Okay, moving on. So we're starting to run a little shorter on time than I expected, so I'm going to cover these next two a little bit faster. Removal of gravel or vein materials from a stream for personal non-commercial use. It has to be done in accordance with the watershed-friendly stream maintenance guide, cannot be sold or transported on a public road, and then 50 tons or less in 12 calendar months. So this is another one where you're allowed to remove gravel from the stream for your driveway or something like that. Has to be, again, personal use, cannot be sold, and you can't transport it on a public road. So as soon as you sell it or as soon as you transport it on a public road, you all of a sudden need a permit from DMRE, which is Division of Mine Reclamation and Enforcement. They have a non-coal mining permit. Even if you are going from one property you own to another property you own, if it's crossing a public road, it requires a permit from them. So it wouldn't apply. But if I'm pulling out gravel from behind my house and using it as my driveway, that's fine. And then the last one is development in a watershed less than a square mile. So this is another one where state regs and federal regs didn't agree. State regs, this was actually anything in a square mile or less was exempt unless it was a building, fill, or dam. Federal regs do not allow exemptions. Even though state regs do, federal ones don't. So what we've done is we've actually just permitted it under the general permit. So if I am doing plantings or if I'm installing a creek crossing inside one of these red circles, I'm beyond the end of the study, which means it's a 1 square mile or less drainage area. So if there's no mapped floodplain and it doesn't involve a building, fill, or dam, it falls under this general permit. Kate asked, what if it is being removed for maintenance and has to be removed from the floodplain? Kate, I'm not really sure what you're asking there. So can you ask it again a little bit clearer for me? And while you're doing that, I'm going to keep moving on, guys, because I want to respect your all's time and we have a little bit to cover yet. So moving on. So permit requirements and other conditions. There are several conditions, just like any other permit you would get, that you have to follow for the permit to be valid. So there are several things the permittee has to do. One, they have to have a copy on site. This is your permit. Knowing it exists is not good enough. You need to have a copy, whether it be digital or on paper. You need to be able to show that to a neighbor or an inspector if they come on your site. Two, local permits are still required. So this general permit is your state permit, but it still has conditions on it that a local permit is required. So for all of my floodplain coordinators on here, you're going to still be issuing local permits that go along with these. And we're going to talk in a couple more slides how that's going to affect you guys at the local level. So hold those questions for me. Any excess materials must be removed from the floodplain. So we talked about installing a pool. Any leftover material, which there's probably going to be some, has to be removed from the floodplain. I believe it gives them like 15 days or something like that to do it. But you can't spread it around on the backyard or dump it down by the creek or something like that. If you're doing it under the general permit, all excess materials have to come out of the floodplain. Disturbance should be minimized, so you need to take action to make sure you don't have a whole lot of sediment runoff or something like that. You need to seed once you're done, doing your activity, or you need to install straw bales or silt fence or something like that to make sure you don't have sediment running off your site. Mobile equipment in the stream is prohibited. So if you have to put equipment in the stream, you do not fall under the general permit. And then you have to take measures to prevent any type of spill or fuel or lubricants or anything like that from entering the water. If something like that happens, you need to contact us as soon as you absolutely can. So that's it for the requirements. Kate had a question of if you have to remove, if you have gravel removed for maintenance and it has to be removed from the floodplain, it seems like the condition of not traveling on roadways prohibits maintenance removal of gravel. So Kate, it just doesn't fall under this permit. So again, if it doesn't specifically fall into this permit, you can always go and get the normal individual permit. This is just what's pre-approved and has been pre-noticed and all that. So you can still do everything you just mentioned. You just have to go through the normal individual permit process. All right, so it doesn't look like we had any questions on the requirements. And again, guys, I'm gonna address that obtain local floodplain permit here in a couple slides. So hold on to any questions there. And then section 4 is going to be other conditions. This is going to be other things that they still have to do. So again, all other permits still need to be obtained. So if you need a 401, 404 permit, if there's a local building permit, if there's endangered species, anything like that, you have to get all other permits that go into it. No application is required for the general permit. Again, you don't have to apply, you don't have to send anything in, you don't have to public notice. All that's been done. If you meet all the conditions, this is your permit. Permittee must comply with all conditions and is subject to enforcement. So again, just because you qualify doesn't mean you get free reign to do whatever you want. You still have to comply with everything in the permit. Permittee has a duty to provide information upon request. So if you see something that is concerning at the local level, you can reach out to us at Division of Water, and we can send requests to that property owner. They have to tell us what's going on, how do they know that they comply, things like that. So they're required to respond to us if they're using a general permit, and then they have to allow any inspection and entry onto the site. So if you're concerned, we can send an inspector out. He can take a look and can make that determination on whether or not they need to contact us in Frankfurt. Kathy, I see your comment, and I'm going to reach out to you directly after this, and we can talk then. All right, so finding and using the floodplain general permit. Right now, it is live on our website. So you can go on and actually download a copy today. So if you go to our Understand Your Flood Hazards webpage, on the right-hand side, we quick links. The floodplain general permit is the second one there. So the general permit is there available for download. If you comply with everything on it, you can start using it today. If you don't comply, immediately above it is the regular apply for a floodplain permit. So those two are side by side for a reason. If you're working in a floodplain, you're going to have to do one of those two. And then again, I can't stress this enough because I've gotten several questions on this already. The printout is your permit. Local permits are still required, but the printout is your state permit. You don't have to go through the normal process as long as you can do everything on that piece of paper. We also updated that website. So the Understand Your Flood Hazards webpage was also updated. So the apply for a floodplain permit section, in the text itself actually includes descriptions of general permits, individual permits, and then also local permits. So it kind of gives you a rundown of the two ways you can get a state permit, and then it also refers you to the locals for the local permit as well, all online. So how does this going to affect your all's local process? I am in the process right now of developing a template that you guys can use at the local level that will, just like the state permit, automatically permit certain developments. I'm still working through what that is, what it's going to look like, how it's going to work with your ordinance, and things like that. So that is coming down the pipe. Hopefully in the next couple weeks, you'll be hearing from me again, and I'll be sharing a template with you guys. In the interim, for right now, keep issuing permits like you are today. So if they're using the general permit from the state, go through your normal process and issue them a local permit. Again, just because they have this state permit doesn't remove the requirement of permits from your local ordinance. So none of that's going to change. Keep doing what you're doing today. Last thing, guys, I always say this, but it really is true with this. With the general permit, I know it's new. I know it's changing things. So it's kind of pushing everybody into a little bit of an uncomfortable place when it comes to the permit. So don't panic. You've got people here that can help. So this is my contact info. And then Sean Hokinson is actually my boss, but he's also filling in for Ron Dutta. So for those of you that remember Ron, he was the supervisor of the floodplain management section. He's since moved on. He's taken another job, but Sean is the interim supervisor there. He is also my boss. So you can reach out to either one of us. We are happy to answer questions. We've gotten several already from people in the public as well as people, at the state, in that, the floodplain management section itself asking us, hey, what about this? Or have you considered that? Or where does this fit in? We absolutely encourage those because we knew when we put this together, there were going to be instances of things we didn't think of. So if, once this is posted online, go back and give it another watch. But if you still have questions, absolutely reach out to us, guys. We are here to help. And with that, guys, I'm going to turn it over to questions. So we've got about 8 or 9 minutes left on this presentation. So I'm going to stick around for like the next 5 minutes or so. If you have questions, absolutely use that chat box. And like I said, the presentation will hopefully be on YouTube early next week. So if you know of somebody who you think this would benefit, you can go to our KY Risk Map YouTube page and actually share that hyperlink with them. But with that, guys, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you have questions, ask. If not, thank you for spending an hour with me today, and everybody be safe. So Joe, you asked what are the regulations regarding renovations that include change of use groups and existing structures within the floodplain. So I assume you're asking if you're going from a commercial to a residential structure or vice versa. At the state level, it really doesn't matter for us other than floodproofing. So you cannot floodproof a residential structure. And again, I'm going to keep repeating it. Structures aren't going to fall into this general permit at all. So we're talking more just individual. But for us at the state level, the regulations are pretty much uniform across the board, other than commercial structure you can floodproof. So outside of that, for us, it's not going to mean a lot. For you all at the local level, your ordinance treats residential and non-residential structures kind of differently. So you're going to be able to look in your ordinance and actually see directly how your community is treating them. So I recommend looking at that. And if I didn't answer your question, Joe, shoot me an email or give me a call. I'm in the office for about another 2 hours today. I'm happy to talk further. Patty, so is a normal stream construction permit completed and submitted and asked to be reviewed as a general permit? Then you approve as such. Patty, the answer is no. To use this general permit, the applicant doesn't have to send anything to us. We think we've thought through all sides and all aspects of the general permit and what we have approved. If you have concerns at the local level when they come to get the local permit, you can absolutely refer them to us individually. We're more than happy to look at individual instances. But based on what we approved and how we worded it, we think as long as they do what we've said in the permit, nothing should be sent to Division Water. Again, unless you have specific questions about an individual site. So no application, no public notice, nothing sent to us. You go on our website, print it off, and that is your permit. Kate asked if they need to apply for a water quality certification but qualify for using the GP for floodplain. Is there a different method for applying? The answer, Kate, is no. I believe, talk to Sean about this one to verify, but when they need a water quality certification, if it's an individual, it's not going to apply. The general permit is not going to apply anyway. If it's a general certification, it will. So if they need an individual water quality cert, they have to go through the normal process for water quality and floodplain. If they qualify for the nationwide permits and the general certs, then the general permit for floodplain also applies. Holly, yeah, reach out to me. I'll be in, like I said, for the next 2 hours. Bill asking about attendance of certificates. So unfortunately, I don't have any way to issue certificates of attendance. I can, write an email or a letter or something like that if you're needing continuing ed credits, but typically, that is, it's not going to be offered with this, unfortunately. Rodney, unattached decks. I don't think I could make that fit anywhere under section 2.2. So again, if it's not explicitly listed in 2.2, the general permit isn't going to apply. So reach out to me directly, Rodney, if you have a idea in mind or something coming down the pipe. I'm more than willing to take a look and like I said, think about it a little more, but I need more specifics. David asked if boring an underground utility under a street, the general permit would cover you as long as the bore and receiving permits are out of the floodway, correct? Answer, David, is yes. So again, that would fall into that subgrade utility section. So as long as they're not in the floodway and they're doing directional drilling under the stream, then yes, that would apply. Rodney, you asked where can the recording be seen? We have a YouTube page called KY Risk Map, RISKMAP. If you go there, you can start seeing some of the webinars I did last year. This is going to be posted, like I said, hopefully early next week. The process for editing this takes a lot of computing time, so I typically have to do it over the weekend. So I'm going to try and have it up there early next week. But if you go to KY Risk Map on YouTube, you should see several presentations that I did last year. So that'll let you know you're in the right spot. I'm going to sit on here, guys, for another 2 minutes. So if you have any more questions, feel free. Otherwise, everybody have a good day.